Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Earned First podcast. My name is Arun Sudhaman. I'm founding editor at Earned First. And this is actually a special podcast that we're doing in partnership with Fin Partners. It's going to be an episode that reviews some of the themes, the lessons, and perhaps takeaways from Praxis Asia-Pacific, which took place in Singapore on the 14th of October, just 3 or 4 days ago. As we record this, maybe when you listen to this, a few more days will have passed. It was the international debut for Praxis. Praxis is an event that has been running for 12 very successful years in India. And it was a huge privilege for me personally to bring it to Singapore. The response was kind of overwhelming. I wasn't expecting the turnout, the support, and really the level of positive feedback as well. It was very good energy in the room. The venue helped. I think being at the National Gallery in Singapore certainly kind of, I think, helps elevate some of the conversations. Um, and we covered a lot of ground at
Mm.
Praxis. We started out with a conversation with Dr. Vicky Bungu, who was president of Rolls-Royce for many years, has apparently just accepted a role at Temasek, by the way, the day after the event. I wasn't allowed to talk about it on stage. He talked about how communicators can prove their value at the highest levels of organizations, which is always very relevant. And then we moved into a variety of topics across geopolitics, um, the impact of artificial intelligence, of course, uh, what consultancies are doing to differentiate themselves, the tussle for talent, and indeed the reinvention of corporate affairs functions. So there's a lot to discuss, and I'm very happy to be joined today by two people who I believe were there the whole day on Tuesday. So joining us from Singapore, we have James Brasher, who's the managing partner of Rice Fin Partners. Welcome, James.
Thank you.
And Joyce Liong, who is senior partner at Fin Partners Singapore. Welcome, Joyce.
Thanks, Arun. Nice to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you both on. So you were both there the whole day on Tuesday,
Yeah, we
Yes,
were there.
I had
diligently
a slightly
preparing.
longer lunch than I should have, but I did catch I did get in time.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, well, it was hard because, I mean, honestly, we were not expecting the turnout, and I think we had something like 180 people in the room at lunch.
Mm.
So it was busy. So it took people a while to kind of conclude the lunch break, which is fine. I think sometimes you have to let these things flow.
Yeah.
But no doubt you were diligently preparing for today's podcast. So let me start by asking you both, and James, I'll start with you if that's okay. What really stood out for you on Tuesday? What were the themes that really resonated and that you think are perhaps are worthy of further discussion here now?
Well, something that you did share in your intro that I have to say I really felt that was really good was it was this vibe, this sort of collaborative spirit, if you like, in the room that made it very comfortable, I think, for people to share, which is exactly
Mm,
what you want um, at this sort of event. But I thought it was at a level you don't usually see, or I don't usually feel. And I think
mm,
that's thanks in large part to the people who spoke and presented
mm,
their openness. But it just really gave way to some really, I think, quality conversation as well. Um,
mm.
and you weren't too bad yourself, Arun.
I think the best for a moderator or host, the best thing is to be unnoticed. That's the best the best compliment that can be paid, right? You just don't want to get in the way.
But,
Um,
but
yeah.
yeah, but I think it really lent itself to a really good open session. Um, yeah, and I think for me, some of the big takeaways would be around, well, even the theme, communications at the crossroads. I think that really nicely sums up the place that we as practitioners find ourselves in. And as was discussed, there's a lot going on. a lot of
Mm,
disruption. I think, as you mentioned also in the intro, AI was tackled from lots of different angles.
mm,
But all the disruption is making our jobs harder, I think harder than ever.
mm,
And I like that what was discussed helped us better prepare for what's going on now, but then it was also looking ahead. And I loved that there was so much focus on the person, on the human impact of the
yeah,
issues, the things that we were discussing. Um, and that made a big difference for me, and I think for a lot of people that attended. Um, just because that's such an important part of what we do and helping us do better, is really taking that into account. So it's not just always talking about the tools or the issues, it's what about the
yeah.
people in all this?
Mm. Really good points. I think I'd love to say there's some sort of formula or process you can follow that gets to that atmosphere and energy and candor in the room, but there isn't. I think it's just it's a sort of alchemy where you kind of have good speakers, they're prepared well. I think there's for many of the people, we've been doing this for many years, right? So perhaps we've built up a level of trust amongst us, whether that's with not just the people on stage, but also the people in the crowd, right? The community. So I think that that's it's a nice thing to see, but I think it's also a reflection of maturity, industry maturity.
Mm,
And if you do these events, perhaps in places where the industry is less mature, I think sometimes you do get less candor because people are a little bit more insecure, perhaps a little bit more competitive, and less willing to really open up about some of these challenges, which is understandable. But as you said, James, we can only kind of tackle and address these problems by, I think, coming together.
mm,
So, yeah, it's really nice to hear that. Um, and of course, the human angle, that was really what stood out to me, I think, because if you say to someone, yeah, we had 3 or 4 sessions on AI, it's not necessarily the stuff of which dreams are made. Um,
I
but
mean, so often it's, yeah, I mean, it could be just AI, 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 AI. And,
yeah,
it was not that at all. Every single session I noticed
mm,
came back to the people.
yeah, yeah. So it really wasn't about AI as so much as it was about what are people grappling with, right?
Mm,
What is top of mind for the people in this industry? And of course, AI is one of the things that is really changing a lot, changing a lot of the processes and products and all of that. Um, Joyce, what stood out for you in terms of the discussions on Tuesday?
I think, sort of, supplementing what James said, right? I think the people in the room did make the biggest difference, right? Everyone's sort of open to discussion and collaboration. And I think what was really nice for me was that there's a well balance of both the agency as well as the brand
Mm,
side of the perspective, which is
yeah.
something you may not always see in a event, of this kind, right? And I think
Mm,
that lends itself to provide a little bit more of a well-rounded perspective, and it's good,
yeah.
like from my point of view, because I'm coming from agency, right? Hearing from the brand owners, or that really was a little bit more eye-opening, in that sense. So I
Mm,
really liked that part. And I think the main thread that really stood out for me was that, the roles, whether you're in agency or in the brand side, is changing. There are all these challenges coming in. What is it that you need to do in order to make yourself a little bit more ready for the future?
yeah. Interesting as well, because I think sometimes there can be a gulf between agency and in-house. I'm not sure if there. Yeah, I do. I wouldn't say there was evidence of a gulf between agency and in-house on Tuesday, but on certain topics and issues, there's certainly a divide, and not in
mm,
the sense of a confrontational divide, but a gap
yeah.
in thinking and process. In some cases, in-house people are potentially ahead. I think they are much more aware of, for example, the importance of proof and value, um, because I feel like their functions are really under a lot of pressure at the moment.
Yeah, and
Um,
I think some of the panelists that sort of allude to the fact that, there is a place for both to play together, and there is a
mhm,
role for each, and how best to navigate the future together. And I think that was really important because, it's really not going to be the onus on one or either side. It is a collaborative effort.
mm. Yeah, how did you see that, James? Because I mean, I've always thought when it comes to innovation, agencies tend to be a step ahead, which you'd expect. They're kind of they're product focused businesses. Their product is comms, right? So you would kind of expect them to be a little bit ahead of in-house people. But you had people from companies like ByteDance, like LinkedIn, very sophisticated in terms of content. Um, do you still see evidence that there is kind of a gap between in-house and agency, or do you see it playing out in different ways?
Um, I don't really. I mean, I think it depends. It depends a lot
Hmm.
on the in-house, the organization, and then the agency as well. Um,
Mm.
I think what was interesting in one of the sessions was with Meta was where Bridget was sharing about how
Yeah.
their team evolved. And I think she was talking about they've brought in a creative, uh, they've brought in a data analyst in the last year. They've brought in some creative people as well. And I think what that sort of was saying to me was, okay, are we on the agency side? Are we up to date with someone like Meta and their team? And I feel that
Mm.
in many ways we are. But then, how is our role going to change as time goes on? If more organisations are sort of in housing these skills or this expertise,
Mm.
um, but I think what she said was great. That you know, there's a lot of value from that outside perspective that agencies can still provide.
Mm.
And I think it's our job on the agency side to morph and to adapt to the client and the clients.
Mm.
And for us, that can be very different from one client to another.
Mm.
And so, yeah, I guess making sure that you can meet their needs, but then also, in one of the other conversations, or maybe in the same conversation, um, you know, what came out was the importance that we sort of partner with them on the thinking, so that we're
Mm.
not just arms and legs. But
Yeah.
I just getting back to the what was being shared before about in-house perspective versus agency. I found it really. It's always so valuable getting the perspective from someone like Bicky, who's
Mm.
really who's looking at things, or his view is from the top, if you like.
Mm.
Because even if you are, say, dealing with business leaders on a daily basis, in many cases, many of us are, we're not, rarely are we having conversations with them that are about the place of comms in their world or in their organization
Yeah.
or comms people in the broader scheme of things. Um, so some of the perspective he provided, I thought was really useful and helpful. Um, I mean, and I can share a bit about what I took away from that session. Now, um,
Yes,
you know,
please.
when he was sort of saying that people sort of look at comms as being the crisis savior, if you like. So
Yeah.
everything's just going along normally. We're not really engaging closely with comms until a crisis pops up, and then all of a sudden come running to comms, in that reactive setting to help us get out of this problem. But he
Mm.
was talking about the need to shift that relationship to being reactive to more proactive.
Yeah.
And talking about how that comms has a role to play in, say, business modeling and resilience early on. So developing the strategy, not just executing it like once the strategy's baked. Um,
Hmm.
and something that we often forget, and I know I certainly do, is that we have, when I say we, meaning the comms, the in-house team, the agency, but we have insights that are across stakeholders that are the broadest in the organization and sometimes the deepest, depending on the group. Um, so our view of the network, as he put it, and sort of the stakeholders, is
Mm.
very valuable to the business, but it isn't used often enough to, say, inform business strategy.
Yeah. Absolutely. He made that point. It has to be more proactive. It has to be embedded across different functions. And he challenged comms people to move out of their, I think, their kind of, he didn't say comfort zone, but I'll say comfort zone. He said, I think, they need to move out of just talking to other comms people, for example. They
Mm.
need to be actively talking to other functions, building networks along those lines. And that's interesting to me because I guess from my perspective, you sometimes think, well, organizations will handle all of that, right? They'll make sure that comms is talking to sales and making sure that kind of salespeople understand the insights that comms might have. But it doesn't always happen that way. The onus is on the comms function to actually step up and do it. I think that was the point perhaps he was making. And it's a really interesting one, how much he talked about sales as well, which,
Mm.
honestly, you go to a lot of comms conferences, and yes, we talk about measurement, we talk about evaluation. I don't think I've been in a session where someone talked quite as much about, he was talking about how we sell products in different markets. And it's a very valuable perspective to have, I
Yeah,
think.
and the role of comms going in, if you're entering into a new market, in laying the groundwork before you even think about going and
Mm,
trying to sell.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
what
He
then
made that point.
Yeah.
yeah, I think it does go back also to some of the tensions that been in the conversations about the role of comms in the whole scheme of things, right? Where if we're just seen as sort of like execution, then there's a big part
Mm,
that's missing. And then that gets into a different conversation where C-suites or leaders might go, "Why is comms relevant?" Because
mhm,
ultimately for them, they're looking at what the business outcomes are going to be. How does this
yeah.
help me drive growth in my business? And that's where as communicators, we do need to get in to those
Mhm,
conversations.
mm,
And that will really also like going back to what James had said about bringing those insights in to help sort of influence strategy, but also being able to measure the impact of our work beyond just sort of the vanity metrics. It's
Mm.
not
yeah.
just about what we've done, but how does that align with the business goals and where is it helping to drive growth?
Mm. Yeah, and Bicky made those points as well. He even, I think, admitted at one point that, yes, when it's tough, comms is, if not the first, one of the first functions to face scrutiny.
Mm.
And I think, that's true. We've all seen that. And the only way out of that is to demonstrate value, right? And
Yeah.
as you said, it's about value beyond vanity metrics. That was discussed. But it's also about, I think, understanding there's a level of insight that comms can bring across all these different areas. But is that, it requires that kind of more proactive mindset. I actually thought as well, Bicky's, the opening session dovetailed really well with the penultimate session, which was with the APAC D, where we had the three corporate affairs heads. We had, sorry, four corporate affairs heads from Kellanova, Heineken, Haleon. and Air Wallex,
Hmm.
talking about the pressure on their functions and how they are reinventing. And whilst I think we had four people on there whose functions are perhaps not quite as pressured as some other companies. So they were relatively, I don't know if I'd use the word secure, but they were at least optimistic. Um, there was still that acknowledgement that there is pressure, there is restructuring, and we have to always be thinking about how we're changing, how we're demonstrating value. I'm wondering, was there anything in that session perhaps that stood out for you as well? Because I just thought that was an interesting look from corporate affairs heads at quite different types of companies.
Yeah.
I think that was
Mm.
one of my favorite sessions, and James knows this. That was a session
Ah,
that really
good.
stood out for me, yeah, because I thought it was a very powerful message that they had, right? That
Hmm.
especially when May from Airwalks actually said, the job description is the job description, it's not the job, and that
Mm,
really signals how you need to sort of, think out of the box in terms of what your role is going to be. It's not
mm,
really just strictly comms in the traditional sense of the word, right? You need to
mm,
look at, where there's a tie-in with the business. What are the different, connections you can have? Where do you really drive growth, and how do you make, help to join the different dots along the line to create that value for the organization? Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
A lot of talk about fluency in that
mm.
session. James, what did you make
Yeah,
of it?
no, because while the discussion was mostly, I guess, in the context of corporate affairs, because of that's then leadership in corporate affairs, because that's the roles that the sort of each of them have. I felt that what they shared is obviously very relevant and applicable outside of that. Just the
Mm,
value of, I think they were talking about data fluency,
mm-hmm.
business acumen,
Yeah,
and learning agility was something else I remember that was mentioned. I mean, that's sound advice for anyone in any role. Coincidentally, it was working with Erin. I was reporting to Erin many years ago, and her
oh
giving me
yeah, at
exposure.
Lewis.
Yeah, her giving me exposure to numbers was, one of those times where my business acumen certainly took a significant step forward. Um, but yeah, that's
Yeah,
just a coincidence. But that was, something that was I thought they covered really well.
yeah, and they talked about the importance of relationships with the board, which I think is it
Mm.
was a really well made point. Um, and also, I thought Rimi Harindran, who's the corporate affairs head at Kellanova, she'd said, it's also about this kind of personal evolution of being comfortable, letting go a little bit, which is also required these days. So, which I found quite an interesting observation, because
Yeah,
it isn't always just about getting better at all these different things, but sometimes it's about how you handle and control, manage different situations.
yeah. I think it was in that panel session. It was one of them where it just on that in relation to the board that someone said, you've got to look at not just what your boss needs; it's what your boss's boss needs. And I thought that was good as
Right.
well.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a
Yeah.
little bit like the circular influence that you need to understand, even sort of within the organization, and how that all
Mm,
connects together, and therefore, what can you do to sort of facilitate those relationships? Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So I pulled up. I've actually pulled up the story now, so now I can give you exact quotes. This is one from Erin. We are schizophrenic, part strategist, part influencer, part storyteller. You have to be fluent in policy, in ESG, data fluent. Um, yeah, Mayloon from Airwallex. Practitioners should embrace agility. I would encourage everybody to flex with change. And here's an interesting one I'll put to you both: the importance of generational renewal, because this is something that extends beyond the corporate affairs function. Um, I think it was Rimi who said, I would invite communicators to think about how you are building the next gen as leaders? How are you exposing them to all of this? Um, are we doing enough to bring the next gen to the table? So how would you both respond to that question?
What I think about is, and just in relation to something that was discussed at the conference around that, was it was actually in the second session with Barbie, where I mean it was a great conversation I felt to help us sort of prepare for what's coming. Looking at 2030 and asking ourselves,
Of
are
course.
you ready?
Yeah.
I mean, after I think it was Thomas shared the backdrop of the world of 2030, I mean, my response to that question of "Are you ready?" was hell no. But I,
Okay.
I felt, but I was relieved to see in the study that they did that
Mm.
I wasn't the only one. It looks like the majority of
No.
people don't quite feel like we're ready for what's to come in the next 5 years. But something that
Right.
Barbie was talking about, because we were, obviously there was a lot of discussion around AI, but she talked about the importance of sort of foundational skills.
Yeah.
Um, and just thinking about the next generation, sure, there's all these skills and expertise that we and they I say we because I'm older than them, but that we need to work on and continue to develop around AI and adapting to that change. But
Mm.
the importance of things like relationships, I
Yeah.
think,
Soft skills.
yeah, face-to-face meetings, and I'd go further to say basic communication skills,
Mm.
writing. you know
Mm.
these things are so important in our industry, in any industry, but particularly in ours. And she was quite quick to say that it's not one or the other. We need to be doing both. And I think for
Mm.
the next generation, that yes, there's simply because of the way the world is. I think that there does need to be a lot of emphasis put on softer skills as well, and that's I think older people like myself can help with that, because I guess my experience is of a world that was before the internet, and so
Mm.
helping the younger generation develop those equally important softer skills, I think is part of the job that we have to do.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
I would.
that was encouraging.
Yeah, sorry, I was gonna say that as well. That the soft skills are important, the technical skills are important. I think those provide the foundation. But I also think that in terms of Arun, what you asked about, are we preparing the next generation of leaders, right?
Mm.
I think mentorship is an important thing that needs to be
Mm.
factored as well. We do a fair bit of that ourselves at Fin, where we have a mentorship program in place to sort of help guide the next level of leaders, right? And I know some of the speakers at the conference had also talked about this mentorship being pretty important, because it does convey certain experiences, provide additional perspectives that may not necessarily translate as well in like training on technical or soft skills per se, but does work well in sort of a mentorship environment. And I remember
Mm.
one of the speakers even mentioned about this reverse mentorship,
Yep.
where you
Yep.
learn from the next generation as well as sort of guide the next generation. So it's a two-way street.
Mm. It's all coming back to me now as you discuss these things. I've kind of suppressed all these memories from from being on stage, and now I can remember the point. Yes, about reverse mentoring. In fact, that whole session, the 2030, are you ready? Um,
Mm,
the stats were very interesting. So, whilst people think they're personally ready, I think a majority, only a minority think their organizations are ready. And then when they're asked what they're ready for, uh, they feel you see more confidence in terms of technologies and things like AI, but less in terms of areas described, I guess, as foundational skills, right? Strategic
mm.
understanding and foresight. Does that worry either of you at all?
It
Yes.
is. Yes, for sure. Because I think it's easier to talk about technology.
Mm,
It's easier to figure that out, but the soft skills, the communication skills, that doesn't always translate as well. And I know that for a lot of the younger people joining the workforce now, where they're sort of like digital natives, digital first,
mhm,
they're a lot more comfortable messaging than they are in actually
mhm,
having a conversation in
Mm,
person, on the phone. There's this bit of an aversion to pick up the phone to speak to somebody. And,
mhm.
and that
Yeah.
that could mean then that very important skill gets lost along the way because it's just not enough practice of it.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing how often I find myself saying, back in my day. But I think it's certainly the case. One of the other questions that was sort of rolling around my head just when we were discussing on the day and just discussing this now is also whether AI is making us stupider as a species.
Mm,
You
yeah.
know, and I'd have to say yes, purely based on what we outsource to it. A lot of thinking,
Yeah.
creativity, and other things as well. It's sure it's making things faster, yes, but are we
Mm,
getting dumber as a result of that? Perhaps. Um,
mhm.
but I'm not sure. Maybe that's not a discussion for today, but it's certainly something that I wonder
Well,
about a lot.
it's actually so we looked. I looked at it in a newsletter earlier in the year because someone actually had made this same point at another event um, that I had been to about the cognitive atrophy.
Mm,
And there's been a couple of studies about this, but the results I think are kind of inconclusive. So on the one
Mm,
hand, yes, there's some evidence to suggest that if you're outsourcing tasks to AI, you become less good at doing them, and that's a challenge. But it does depend on to an extent on how much you're outsourcing and how intentional you are
yeah,
about
mm,
the kind of things that you're doing. So it's quite a nuanced topic, but it worries me a lot because I think if you're a writer or if you're writing, it's so tempting to outsource writing. And I really worry that, if you lose the ability to write, then you're kind of, well, at least for me anyway, I would be stuck, I think. Um, so yeah, I think that's quite a big, that's quite a big concern, I would
mm,
say, in terms
I
of
mean, I
AI.
think I think it also goes back to a whole discussion where people talk about yes, AI is great, but there always needs to be a human intelligence at the
Mm,
center of it, right? So I
yeah.
think that then lends itself to in response to James's question, I would say it depends. How
Mm,
intentionally are you structuring the use of AI? What kind of guidelines and policies do you have in place that then governs it in a way that you don't lose the important skill sets, but still
mm,
sort of like the human at center of it. And I
yeah.
think that's a question that actually a lot of the organization had asked as well, or had discussed during the conference, and we ourselves, find ourselves confronting this question, right? Which is
Mm,
why, even at Fin, we've got our own sort of guidelines and policies with the use of AI. We know it's already here. We know there's no running away from it. So it's
yeah.
not about don't use it. It's more like how can we best use it without losing what's important to us and still having human intelligence be the one that value adds, that gives it, that perspective, that emotive intelligence, the authenticity. So you take something and make it better rather than
Yeah.
sort of being taking the lazy way out and just have it be the same, but have someone else AI do it for you.
Yeah. It reminds me of something that Heidi Ashley said from HSBC. I don't think she actually used this quote, but she made a longer point, which was that throughout her career, she has kind of, as you'd expect from someone who works in corporate comms on the uh, in well, she's in financial services now, it's heavily regulated industries. There's a lot of crisis. There's a lot of issues management. Um, and she effectively runs to the fire. Right, that's kind of
mm,
the skill she's had to develop um, and hone. And yes, of course, that's important from a crisis perspective, but I think it's important in general, perhaps. It means, you know, rather than taking the easy way out, um, actually having to confront whatever the challenge might be, whether it's making sure that AI isn't, you're not outsourcing everything to AI,
mm,
uh, or making sure that you are dealing with a crisis, making sure that you're, weighing up how different governments are responding to different things and making a determination on that rather than trying to please everyone. This is uh, it's not always instinctive, but I think it's something that perhaps it's a skill that for communicators becomes more important.
mm. There's something else just around AI that it cut across a number of other panel discussions and that really and it was discussed that it's something that I constantly think about, and I'm not exaggerating there, but it's we all know that the way we're using it, it's helping us to generate content, efficiency, that sort of thing. But one of the examples that it was Emma shared was how there's AI driven avatars selling uh, over a live stream
Yeah.
in China, and
Hmm.
they're they're based on two real people, and they sold over $7 million of products during this live stream, which is
Yeah.
more than any. It's the most they've made ever, like more than they've done when they've done it themselves in real life. Um,
Mm.
and what was talked about, and I still grapple with though, is that with all that we can do with AI and that we're doing with a generative AI, what happens to authenticity, credibility, trust? These things that we keep telling ourselves are so important, and studies show people feel are important and are so important to our profession and people working in it. But and I wonder to myself if it is more of a generational thing that because I care about authenticity, and
Mm.
does it mean that as time goes by that that's going to matter less, or become less important, or are we heading to a point where there is going to be a backlash against content that's created by AI, where people
Yeah.
essentially say refuse to consume content that they know is AI generated? I mean, I actually don't know the answer, so that's why I'm asking the question.
Yeah. Um, so that was the presentation from Emma Smith from Sandpiper, but there was another session with Isabel from the Hoffman
Yes,
Agency,
yeah,
and they were discussing this exactly. I think really,
they
in a
were.
world of AI content, what is the value of credibility? And I think it was Puneet Singh from ByteDance, which is of course the company behind TikTok, who had said, credibility ultimately becomes the most important currency for communicators. It buys belief, it buys you trust, it gets your net promoter scores up. It gets, that's what will persuade people to stand up for you and defend you. Third parties, independent voices. Um, and I think Elisa Chopard from LinkedIn made the point that, empathy and authenticity become even more important in this AI driven world. So I think that's true. I think they do become more important. But the question is, um, how many people will actually listen to that? How many brands and corporates? Because the temptation is always, I think, more content at
Hmm.
scale, faster, you know.
But
Um,
also, does that China example suggest otherwise?
yeah, it's a really good question. Did people maybe trust an AI avatar because of the source of that avatar? Um,
I
is it
mean,
about the ecosystem,
it's also
Joyce?
got to do with, I was going to say, it's also got to do with, was this already apparent to the audience,
Mm,
because I think one of the key things as well is disclosure, right?
yeah.
Are they aware that it was an avatar they were sort of interacting with, and therefore, that's acceptable in that sense?
Yeah. Really good. It's really good questions. I think there's always, the ecosystem matters as well to an extent. So
Mm,
people, I would imagine, are maybe more attuned to this kind of buying on certain ecosystems, in certain communities, maybe even in certain countries. Um, will that work everywhere? Will credibility be more important in other places? I guess we'll see.
mm.
Uh, but it does raise really interesting questions because, yes, AI avatars are coming. I think we're seeing not just for selling, but even CEO avatars. People
I
were
mean,
talking
there's the whole
about.
AI influencer movement, right?
Yeah.
With a lot of, these AI influencers getting really popular very
Hmm.
quickly, huge followings. People are aware they are AI, and they do follow them with fully aware what they're going in for. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And what do you think is the formula for an authentic AI influencer, assuming there is some kind of authenticity there?
I think at the end of at the back end of it, right? Even if the avatar is AI generated and content or what they do is driven by AI, there is still some human sort of orchestration behind that.
Exactly. That's trusted.
So that's
Yeah.
not missing. It's not fully automated in a sense, right?
Yeah.
So there are still certain directions that's given, certain
Hmm.
decisions are made by the human, which then lends
Yeah.
itself to being able to make sure that that engagement
Yeah.
is as authentic as it can be.
Yeah.
So that's that to consider as well, and I think it is a different area of influence that we do need to consider because of the
Mm.
changes we're seeing in today's landscape. And there are going to be areas we need to navigate there, like you said, according to the levels of trust, authenticity. How do we make sure that that isn't lost even when we create those sort of engagement?
Yeah. That credibility is there, but I suppose the risk is the more we see of AI avatars, there's always that risk that they'll become kind of more and more divorced from humans and
Hmm.
humanity, and that's where challenges will come up, right? And let's be honest, right? Not all of them are going to have that same level of human involvement. Um, there will be pretty nefarious uses as well, no doubt, for
Yeah,
the
I
AI
think there's been some
avatars.
backlash on that as well, where
Mm,
when they didn't monitor it enough, and then the AI influencer was sort of saying things that were, a little bit not quite approved, and so
yeah.
that had a huge audience backlash as well as from brands as well, where that's not quite right. It was going to very
It went
murky territory.
rogue.
Yes,
Did they lose
exactly.
their job?
Sorry?
Did they lose their job?
Pretty much.
They
I'm
were
sure they
unplugged.
do. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we can close soon. I just wanted to end. This has been really fascinating discussion, but I actually wanted to end perhaps appropriately with the final conference session about the kind of the future of consultancies in a way, because we didn't talk about that much during the day, but we did a little bit at the end with George Caprias from Yafira, and we had Lena from Mutant, and they were just talking about how consultancies scale and grow in this kind of environment. I'm wondering if there were any takeaways from that session that made you perhaps, uh, rethink how you're looking to grow at Fin.
Um, from memory, uh, I think what they talked about was, and was shared really, I think, drove home the role that obviously people play in
Mm.
the success, growth, development of businesses like ours.
Yeah.
Um, and it wasn't just in that session. I think, you
Hmm.
know, I think, but they did talk about, and I think, what they've done in terms of, say, giving people a stake in the business and that sort of thing that has really, I
Yeah.
think, served them well. Their culture, uh,
Mm.
L&D as well, and I think that's certainly something that, and quite recently, actually, Joyce and I have been discussing, is the
Mm.
emphasis that we put in those areas. And I think that traditionally, or historically, I should say, both Rice and Fin Partners in Singapore have done a really good job with that.
Yeah.
But, it's an area that, given all that we've talked about, and that was the focus of some of the discussions and conversations at the summit, um, you know, even more effort, more resource, more time that needs to go into developing people, into training, and maybe looking at not the normal and traditional ways of doing that, in
Mm.
order to kind of stand out and be different. And I mean, not just for the sake of it, but so that our people, you know, can continue to sort of do great things, do good work, and keep doing what's needed to for us to keep growing. I think
Yeah.
that was something that, and again, not just in that session, but from some of the comments that others made as well, that was one of the takeaways for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I know that James, we had talked a lot about that as well, and how we want to make sure that the culture is always sort of, preserved, and making sure that, of course, the employees are invested in the future with us as well. And I think the whole learning development and making sure that they're also sort of embedded very much in that journey is kind of important, so that it is a joint future that we're creating together, and not sort of a solo interpretation of where they should be.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. And comes back, I guess, quite neatly to the importance of that kind of collaborative energy, right? Whether that's
Mm.
at the agency or in the conference room. So long may that continue. I think
Yep.
we are definitely stronger together. Um, so James and Joyce, thank you so much for your time, and thanks, of course, for your support. Thanks to Fin Partners for partnering with us on this podcast. Thanks for being at the event and paying attention throughout. That's really all I ask of people that come. So I really appreciate it. And yeah, I hope you have a nice weekend.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. It was a pleasure.